Printing things out to the terminal screen is one of the easiest things that you can do in any programming language. And because of that, it's pretty much tradition that the first program that you write when you're exploring a new language is a program called Hello World that prints the message Hello World at the top of the terminal screen whenever you run the program. Now, printing stuff off to the terminal screen is incredibly useful. You can use it for printing out data points, for printing out results of calculations, displaying tables and graphs and bar charts and even game boards. I've seen it all done, and really your imagination is the limiting factor here. So let's get started. How do we do that? Well, as it turns out, a C++ program straight out of the box is incredibly naive. Even if you were to type out the correct commands to print something out to the screen, it still wouldn't know what you were talking about. What's a terminal screen? How do I print that out? Why do I print it out? What do I do here? And to explain all of that to the program, you have to write several hundred lines of tedious code. So let's get started because we have a lot of work to do. So the first thing that you do, no, I'm just playing. We don't have to write several hundred lines of code, but really it does require those several hundred lines of code. The beauty of it is that the C++ developers have already pre-written that code because, well, printing things out to the terminal screen is a very common practice. And they've stored that pre-written code inside of what they call a library. Now, there are hundreds of these libraries, and each of these libraries have different functionalities included. Some of them include advanced math functions, generating random numbers, etc., etc. And we're going to learn a ton of these libraries, but the first one we're going to learn is the one that allows us to print stuff to the terminal screen. It also allows us to gather input from the terminal screen, and we'll learn about that here shortly. So how we use this library of pre-written code is we put a pound sign, and then we type out the keyword and include, and then we put a set of angled brackets after all of this. In between these angled brackets, which are really just a less than and greater than symbol, is we name the library. And this library in particular is called IO stream. IO is pretty obvious, input and output, but stream, because that's what we're inputting and outputting, is a data stream. This is one of the rare exceptions in C++ where you don't need to include a semicolon at the end of the line. So we're just going to keep going, dropping down a couple of lines, and then we're going to include this controversial doozy, using namespace standard, right? So why all the controversy? Well, I think it's beyond the scope of the conversation that we're currently having. Let's just say that if you're writing some more complex code that involves a ton of different libraries and blah, 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 then you might not want to use this. But for our purposes, what using namespace standard does is there's two versions of C++. One is a longhand, tedious version of C++, and one is a shorthand version of C++. They're very similar to each other. If you know the shorthand version, you pretty much know the longhand version. And I'll show you examples of both just to show you that it's nothing major that I'm leaving out. Just one of them is easier to type out than the other, and it's shorter to type out than the other. But for our purposes, for the rest of this tutorial series, we're going to be using the shorthand version and using this namespace standard stuff. But I encourage you to look this up on YouTube or Google and see what it's all about and see what the pros and cons of using it are so that you know what I'm talking about, as we move forward. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. We want to actually print something out to the terminal screen. These are all the prerequisites that are required. And so now we can actually do the job. So the first thing we do is type out the keyword cout. That's how it's pronounced, cout. And what cout really means is, hey, we want to print some things out to the terminal screen. Easy as that. Then you're going to include a couple of less than signs, but you can really think of those as a sort of set of arrows. And then you're going to include some sort of data, and then you cap that off with a semicolon, and that's it. And what they're going for here is this data stream that we're going to put in is going to be flowing in the direction of the arrows outwards towards the terminal. And so they want to show a sort of direction of data movement with lines like this. Now, how we put the data in for real, in our case, is we're going to put a set of quotation marks in there. And then in between these quotation marks, we're just going to type out the message that we want to appear to the terminal. And easy as that, we have made Hello World work. Now, notice this. This Hello World drops down a line, and directly below is this process returned 0 business. Well, if I want to separate these two, maybe have a blank line between the two outputs just for neater formatting, what I can do is another little trick here that I'm going to show you. We can put in another couple of arrows and keep this data stream going, and we can type out ENDL. This stands for end line. And what this does, it's sort of like hitting the enter key. It just moves stuff down. Now, let's see what that looks like. Let's run this. When we run this, you can see now that hello world prints off, but then process return 0 isn't slam against hello world like it was. We have a nice blank space in between the outputs, and are sort of separated, and is sort of easier to read. Well, you can keep this data stream going as long as you want, as long as you keep on supplying arrows in between each item. We can drop down 2 lines. Heck, we can drop down 3 lines. We can come in there and we can print out some other stuff that you put in between quotation marks. Then we can drop down some more lines. It doesn't matter. Keep it going. Go freestyle. Just keep it coming. And so we run this, and we see hello world drops down several lines, and then we see other stuff, and then it drops down several lines. Now, that being said, I want to point out this, that all of this within the code was done within a single line. But when we run this, we see that all of our outputs are on separate lines. So I want to show just the concept that how it looks in the code has no bearing on how it looks on the terminal screen. Really, all we're doing here is following a set of simple instructions. Print this out, drop down some lines. Print this other stuff out, and drop down some lines. We're following simple instructions. And so even though it's on one line in this code, it's on several lines in the terminal. Now, on the other hand, just to illustrate that point, you can do it the opposite. You can see out to the screen, I don't know, hey, and then we can drop down a line and see out to the screen, y'all. And then let's put our semicolons at the end of this. I noticed that I didn't put that up there as soon as I dropped down a line. And so we have this on 2 separate lines now in our code. But when we run this, we say, hey, y'all appears all on the same line in the output. Well, that's because we didn't tell it to drop down any lines. Cout is a very literal beast. If you don't tell it to drop down lines, it won't. If you do, it will. And here, it was told to print out hey, and then at the first available space, which on the terminal was at the tail end of hey, print out y'all. And so we can do a couple of things to sort of fix the formatting of this, if you will. We can either put a space at the end of hey, and so, yeah, that'll print it all on one line, but now it's not crammed up against each other. It's hey, we put a space at the end of hey, and then y'all prints out. Or, equivalently, we can put the space at the beginning of y'all, and it does the same thing. It still prints off hey, y'all, as so. And so let's, maybe drop down a couple of lines between this example and our next example. And I'll show you how we can take this maybe to an extreme. If you wanted to print out a vertical word, well, gosh, it's kind of tedious, but let's throw it down. Let's say cout and H, and then we'll drop it down a line, and then we'll say E, and then we'll drop it down a line, and then we'll put another couple set of arrows here, and we'll say Y for hey, and then we'll drop down some lines here to separate our outputs. And then let's run this, and you see that we have a vertical hey printed out to the screen. Now, before we go, maybe I'll give you an example of the longhand version, just to show you that we're not missing much and to show you what the longhand version looks like. So I'm going to pick the most tedious line that we've done so far, which is this one, just to kind of illustrate. Now, this is a little bit shorter, and it's really not a big deal to do the longhand version, but for demonstration purposes and educational purposes, I really think the shorter stuff works better. And this is how everybody learns C++, by the way. If you learn C++ at a university level, you learn the shorthand version first. And so I'm sort of mimicking that. And so how you would do this, the longhand version, is you would type out std, : and then you type out cout. That's just the same stuff. And then all of the next little bit would be exactly the same. Hello world. out with an exclamation point there, and then put some arrows, and then you do std colon inline and some more arrows, and std colon inline and some more arrows there, and then std colon inline and then some more arrows there, and then we would print off the string other stuff. And then we would put some more arrows, and then std colon inline, and then we would put some more arrows and std colon inline. And so I'm pretty sure that you can see the pattern here. Just about before every keyword that C++ has to offer. There are some exceptions, but just about in front of every keyword that C++ has to offer, you just basically type out std colon very repetitively for every key word. And so that's what this using namespace standard allows us to do, is just type out the keyword for what it is without the std colon in front of it. If you ever have to switch from shorthand to longhand, it's just that easy. Just type out std colon in front of, well, practically everything that you type, every keyword anyways. And so when we run this, we see that, well, it's functionally the same. Hello world, other stuff, hello world, other stuff. And so there you go. So I'll see you guys in the next video where we're going to talk about something called escape sequences. All right, see ya.